there is a miscommunication or a lack of proper function genetically at the androgen receptor level, having to do with all these different binding domains.
155 on the road. You could be a friend of me, an enemy. Keep that same old energy, cause I know I'm in my element. Ooh, yeah. I'm in my element. Ooh, yeah. I'm in my element. I'm in my element. Ooh, yeah. I'm in my element. Ooh, yeah.
What's up, everybody? It's your boy Ryan, and this is the Thunder Channel on nootropics, on testosterone, on biohacking, on male performance. Look, I know you're gonna love the video and all of our content, so just hit that subscribe button now, bro. I also have a friend who's been through a lot, not the least of which is losing his dog years ago, and he would really appreciate it, bro, if you'd hit the like button. All right, before we get into the video, look, if you want to support us and you want access to very epic nootropic products, go to livecortex.com. I mean, it runs the gamut, the kind of really powerful stuff you can get, not the least of which is the Torque Nootropic Stack, super popular, turns your brain on. Many nootropics downloadable guides that have stacks in them, as well as consultations from me and digital guides like the Getting on TRT guide. You can get all this stuff in the description of this video or at livecortex.com. Okay, so what I want to do in this video, as to not complicate it exceedingly for folks, is I want to get into a paper that basically demonstrates that anabolic androgenic steroids, and a particular one, have the ability to positively modify androgen receptor function. It has been long thought that in some of these hardcore sexual dysfunction cases, like PFS and PSSD, and this is all very relevant to me because I've been recruited by that community. Well, it started like 6 years ago, so I got my first email like, hey, this is happening, can you help me? Because I was the neurotransmitter guy and they thought it was neurotransmitters, but I had to dig deeper and further to understand it really had not much to do with neurotransmitters. Now, look, I think there's a lot of things wrong in cases where people have hardcore enduring sexual dysfunction after an SSRI or after something like finasteride or dutasteride. And in a lot of cases, it's actually remediable so long as the person's on the right protocol with HRT. Now, not just TRT for the record, but TRT plus HCG plus adequate estrogen control. I think the predominant reason for that is you got intratesticular testosterone a little bit. You have more of your endogenous testosterone. You have a restoration of the neurosteroids, which SSRIs actually do inhibit. But at the same time, human chorionic gonadotropin fosters more of your testosterone converting to DHT via facilitating the 5-alpha reductase enzymes intratesticularly. Now, this isn't a video about like protocols to resolve, PFS, PSSD relative to TRT plus HCG, because then dialing that protocol gets more nuanced and complex relative to estrogen control and things like that, as well as dose and protocol, frequency of injection, administration type, all these kinds of things. But what I do want to highlight is that, in these communities with hardcore sexual dysfunction, there has been this kind of overarching, or at least background theory that there is androgen receptor problems, like androgen receptor insensitivity. And it turns out in the literature, there is such a thing. And what it looks like mechanistically is happening is, to put it simply, there is a lack of transactivation, which is effectively the rate of transcription. And transcription is effectively copying a segment of DNA into RNA. And then after that point, you encode proteins, and then you actually get the response at the genetic level from something. Anyway, that's super complex, and we're not going to really get into that now, but I do want to talk about this anabolic androgenic steroid having the ability to restore a mutated androgen receptor where there was depressed spermatogenesis as well as subfertility and more than likely sexual dysfunction as a result. The strange sort of status of this case, which I'm going to direct us to a paper called Human Androgen Receptor Mutation Disrupts Ternary Interactions Between Ligand Receptor Domains and the Coactivation Transcription Intermediary Factor 2, where there was a mutation in this guy's androgen receptor, but it did not affect ligand binding. So androgens could bind DHT, testosterone, right to the ligand. There was no inhibition of binding, but it was what happened after the receptor binding that was inhibited. And we're going to talk about a particular steroid that resolved the issue. And I think we should discuss why. I want to take you deep into this paper, and I need you to stay with me, and I'll explain this in non-scientific terms after we read this. It goes, nonetheless, the mutant AR, so this mutant messed up androgen receptor, displayed only half of wild-type transactivation capacity when exposed to physiological or synthetic androgens. So basically what that means is there was lack of, or half of the rate rate of transcription, and ultimately transcription fosters the copying of DNA into RNA, and then ultimately ends up encoding proteins, and the proteins at the end of this chain are made, to the cell, it's carried to the cell, and then inside of the cytoplasm of the cell. And that's where you really get the reaction post-receptor binding. Now, here's the really interesting part about the anabolic androgenic steroid that resolved this issue in this particular person. The paper goes, in mammalian 2 hybrid assays, N727K disrupted LBD interactions. Now, this is the name for this mutations, and the LBD is one of 3 kind of binding domains or elements of the androgen receptor. It is the C-terminal ligand binding domain. So this mutation disrupted the ligand binding domain interactions with another element of the androgen receptor, which is the N-terminal transactivation domain, which fosters transactivation and proper transcription, proper genetic function. They go, strikingly, the transactivation defect of the mutant androgen receptor can be rectified in vitro with mesterolone. They go, consistent with the ability of this androgen analog to restore sperm production in vivo. Now, here's what's really interesting about this. Mesterolone, but not the physiological androgen dihydrotestosterone, restored mutant LBD interactions with the N-terminal transactivation domain and with TIF2 when expressed as fusion proteins in the 2 hybrid assay. And they're ultimately concluding that pathogenicity is transmitted through reduced interdomain and co-activator interactions in androgen analogs that are corrective in vitro may indicate hormonal therapy. So I know that that's very complex, and believe me, at the genetic level, it's even hard for me to understand, but I want to break this down by showing you a graphic here. Let's just take a look at this graphic. This is a cell, right? And you have the cytoplasm of the cell, this kind of outer layer. You've got various androgen receptors that are in both the cytoplasm as well as the nucleus of the cell. You got over here on the bottom, here's your testosterone coming into the cell. There's 5-alpha reductase, a very critical element of converting your testosterone to DHT, but even if it's converted to DHT, that's not the end result. You have this stuff that happens post-receptor binding. Then DHT binds to the androgen receptors right here. The DHT enters the nucleus, binds to the androgen receptors there, but then ultimately to get the androgenic effect, there's this whole cascade of kind of genomic things that are happening relative, again, to transactivation, transcription factors. There are co-activators that facilitate androgen function. When they're not functioning correctly, the androgen receptor post-binding is not going to operate correctly, and you won't get androgenicity and sexual effects. And then ultimately you have this translation into the proteins where you get the androgenic effect. All right. So point number 1, major point, I guess, even after testosterone converts to DHT via 5-alpha reductase and starts binding to the androgen receptors, there's all this genetic stuff that has to happen, copying of DNA to RNA, and then the translation into the protein and the actual androgenic effect. Now, herein lies, in some of these sexual dysfunction cases, where I believe the problem is. There is a miscommunication or a lack of proper function genetically at the androgen receptor level, having to do with all these different binding domains, like the C-terminal ligand binding domain, the N-terminal transactivation domain, and the recruitment of transcriptional co-activators. All right, let's get back to this anabolic androgenic steroid. Now, mesterolone is proviron. Okay, this is an anabolic androgenic steroid with weak anabolic properties, largely androgenic properties. You're going to see that in addition to TRT plus HCG, like if that's working at some baseline level but not fully restoring sexual function, that some people get their sexual function back after SSRIs or after finasteride or dutasteride with proviron plus HCG plus TRT and adequate estrogen control. Now, I'm not saying anything definitive here, but what I am saying is that potentially the reason that this happens is because mesterolone or proviron has the ability to effectively, without getting scientific about it, fix a broken androgen receptor relative to its genetic function. And the really telling part of this paper, which is just mind-blowing, is mesterolone, but not the physiological androgen dihydrotestosterone, restored mutant LBD interactions with the TAD and the TIF2 when expressed as fusion proteins. So it's like this anabolic androgenic steroid, but not your regular DHT, had the ability in this particular case to resolve the androgen receptor mutation, which then facilitated fertility and spermatogenesis and likely sexual function in this person. If you got impaired spermatogenesis and subfertility, more than likely you've got sexual dysfunction too. But here's the problem. Sterolone or Proviron is not a drug that is legal in the United States of America, right? You can't get it prescribed. I think it's legal in the UK. I think they prescribe it somewhere overseas, potentially some other countries. So, guys that are using Proviron or ultimately have to end up using Proviron to try to restore sexual dysfunction have to acquire it by other means, underground labs, hopefully pharmaceutical grade through somebody who maybe knows a company or someone that works within one of these pharmaceutical companies, either here in the States or, over in India, that can actually get pharmaceutical grade Proviron. People end up acquiring it that way. It's a shame that it isn't available here in the States for people to, use via, a script from their doc. In addition, some of the major frustration of the PFS and the PSSD community out there is that doctors really have zero idea how to approach this. I mean, some of the most advanced ones will suggest TRT, probably add HCG in because their clinic or whatever wants to sell you HCG, but not really understanding that HCG facilitates the 5-alpha reduction of your testosterone into DHT. That ultimately ends up helping because you need potent androgenicity, potent androgen binding, and ultimately, activation of the androgen receptors at a genetic level at their target tissues. And by the way, you've got androgen receptors in your penis. So this is a problem, right? Your TRT clinic, nor your urologist, nor your GP, obviously not your GP, right? Nor anyone that's even calls himself a specialist in this area relative to, hormone replacement therapy has any idea about any of this stuff. You're never going to talk to anybody at a clinic that's going to get at the androgen receptor level, right? This is why you've got to be doing your own research yourself, and you have to rely on people that like to think a lot deeper. Those guys at the HRT clinics are just going to go with, testosterone. Here, run some cypionate, we'll run some HCG, that'll help with fertility. There's going to be no really super detailed deep dives on what is happening at the androgen receptor level. You're just not going to find that. Which is why I wanted to do this video, to give you another avenue of thought if you're one of those people that has PFS or has PSSD, or say you were hyperprolactinemic for a long time, because that's also a 5-alpha reductase inhibitor. Having high prolactin, which may be a tip off for some of you folks that have taken SSRIs, whether your prolactin's in range now, doesn't matter. If you had a hyperprolactinemia for a long time, that messed with 5-alpha reduction of your TAS to DHT and mess with the 5AR system as a whole. And there is literature to support that, so please go look it up. But, for those communities and people that haven't taken finasteride, dutasteride, or an SSRI, but that still have sexual dysfunction that TRT is not remedying, first of all, you should get on HCG and see if that remedies it. You should obviously control your estradiol, not let it get above range. Keep it between 20 and 30. That's a good number to stay between. That's picograms per milliliter on the sensitive or ultra-sensitive test. But, if that doesn't fix it, you may actually need to bring in an anabolic androgenic steroid that has a greater potency at the androgen receptor level to facilitate better genetic function, to restore these binding domains and better facilitate the co-activator, so that you get at the genetic level, at the protein level, once the androgens bind inside the cytoplasm and the nucleus of the cell, the actual androgenic effect. Now let's talk about what I think is happening here quickly, just to sort of end this off for those of you that are geeking out on this and figuring out, how is it possible that another potent androgen, but not your inherent physiologic androgens, have the ability to restore androgen receptor function and therefore fix subfertility and a lack of spermatogenesis and sexual dysfunction? The answer is nobody knows. But I have seen a paper suggesting that because of the sort of I'm going to butcher how they said it, but essentially the fullness, the absolute binding capacity of something like Sterolone, which is more potent ligand at the receptor level, it's almost like waking this whole receptor complex up and all the co-activation, and things like the C-terminal ligand binding domain and the N-terminal transactivation domain, right? It's like waking these things up because it's a more full agonist and with higher affinity. It's potently agonizing the receptor sites and it's kind of waking them up in all these genetic capacities. So what I really wanted to do in, providing that paper and kind of having this discussion is, again, open up another action of communication in people's brains that both validates the long suspicion in some of these sexual dysfunction situations where there is androgen receptor insensitivity, which is really androgen receptor mutations. Because look, you can have an androgen bind to the androgen receptor correctly, right? There's no problem with binding, ligand binding, but it's thereafter where the real magic happens. And in that process, there can be something that is awry. So I hope in some sense, like it validates facilitate some of your thinking, you know, some of you folks that have PFS or PSSD that have thought about this or researched it, that there is something wrong with the androgen receptor. Yeah, I mean, I think it's very clear based on that paper that there could be mutations in the androgen receptor. Now we actually have a paper that demonstrates that this is true. And at the same time, you know, just to give folks the idea and the understanding that potentially you're going to need a stronger ligand to be binding to the androgen receptors to facilitate, you know, fixing what is broken at the genetic level or post-receptor binding at that androgen receptor to restore sexual function in these cases of having PFS or PSSD. That's assuming, though, that you've tried TRT plus HCG with the right doses, the right frequency, the right administration method, as well as the right estradiol control for you, because that is a whole complicated, you know, web of what should be precision strategy too, right? It's not just TRT plus HCG and then you're good to go. Like, you know, you've got to have the right doses. And that's going to be different for different people. But for those that have tried that and had the dose right and actually managing estradiol correctly, keeping estradiol in like the 20 to 30 picograms per milliliter range, and still you're not getting resolution, you may want to look at harder binding ligands like synthetic DHT analogs and their capacity to restore proper androgen function to get alleviation or resolution of your symptoms. I've got consultations where I will do a deep dive with you to figure out exactly what is happening, look at labs, hear your story, and get to the bottom of how to resolve it. I've been doing this for very many years, so you can hire me for this sort of thing at livecortex.com. Otherwise, if you're into nootropics and want help formulating nootropic regimens, all things TRT, energy optimization, I got a lot of specialties. You can check those out and then go book with targeted email advice, consults, call consults, larger programs in under a minute at livecortex.com. Also at the website, we've got courses relative to nootropics that teach you how to use them to get powerful results. I mean, stop rummaging around Reddit and getting misinformation regarding nootropics. Just get it from the horse's mouth. I created 3 powerful courses, a bunch of guides, which are stack written, as well as a digital guide on getting on TRT. And you get all that stuff at the website or in the description of this video or livecortex.com. And of course, if you're looking for an epic nootropic stack, just go buy Torque, 6 to 8 hours of clean stimulant energy. You're not going to regret buying the Torque nootropic stack. This stuff is powerful. Again, links for all of our products are in the description of this video. All right, guys, appreciate you being with me. I feel like this needs to be explored further. Like, I think there's just a lot more discussion that can happen, but I didn't want to have you sitting here for 30 minutes. You know, I just wanted to make this as quick as possible, but as detailed as possible. I'm going to be doing more deep dives as far as androgen receptor mutations, anabolic androgenic steroids, and how they may affect androgen receptor mutations and help restore sexual function in some of these really wicked cases that that TRT alone can't fix. Because I think it deserves more discussion, and it deserves more discussion at this level, because again, the clinics in your doc have zero idea what to do, and none of them are paid enough or have the inclination, the interest, or the time to look into it at the receptor level. All right, please like the video if you appreciate anything I said. Subscribe, hit the bell to get notified of our future content. Look forward to all the rest of the content coming this week. I'll talk to you. Oh, hope you had a great happy 4th. I went downtown here in Pittsburgh and watched over at Point State Park this spectacular fireworks display. It was absolutely amazing. You know, I had a good time, was safe, and I hope you did too. Happy 4th of July, everybody. All right, everyone, stay lean, stay muscular, stay functional. I'll talk to you guys on the next one.
No, I'm in my element, ooh, yeah. I'm in my element, ooh, yeah. I'm in my element.